After the Civil War, Texas ranchers returned home to cattle herds that had grown tremendously while they were away at war. Because there were so many cows, the price of beef plummeted in Texas. Fortunately, there was a huge demand for beef in the East. The Civil War soldiers had eaten most of the beef there. Longhorn cattle sold for $4 in Texas and $40 in eastern states. The only problem: how to get the cows across the country? Texas Longhorns. A young cattle shipper from Illinois named Joseph McCoy came up with the idea to guiding herds of cattle north through Texas and Oklahoma, and ending in railroad towns in Kansas. In Kansas, the cattle would be placed on trains and transported east. Joseph McCoy. In the 1800s, a part Cherokee Indian trader named Jesse Chisholm made a wagon trail in northern Texas. In 1867, the first cattle herd was driven along this route, from the Red River in San Antonio to the railroad in Abilene. It's estimated that 6 million cattle were herded up the Chisholm Trail from 1867 to 1885. Crossing the Colorado River on the Chisholm Trail. Cattle roundup. Cattle trails. The cowboys needed other trails to herd cattle to the northern plains. The Great Western Cattle Trail was established through western Texas up to Nebraska and northern territories. This became the main trail for cattle heading to railroad loading points for northern markets. Cowboys along the trail. After the Civil War, slaves were free, but many had no place to go and no way to survive without continuing to work for their former slave owners, sharecropping. Many African Americans decided to head west and became the Black Cowboys of Texas. About 9,000 black cowboys worked as farmhands and herded cows along the cattle trails. During this time period, African Americans on the cattle trails were treated much better than anywhere else. Here, racial segregation was minimal. Black and white cowboys worked, ate, and slept together. The cowboys' bosses were interested in skills, not skin color, and black cowboys often proved themselves on the ranch and in rodeos. SS5H3B famous American. SS5H3B famous American. In 1903, Orville and Wilbur Wright made the first powered flight in an airplane they built themselves. The flight only lasted 12 seconds, but it was the beginning of the aviation and space exploration industries. Orville and Wilbur Wright. George Washington Carver was an African-American scientist who created more than 300 products from peanuts and sweet potatoes. Some examples are plastics, dye, medicines, flour, and fertilizer. He also taught farmers about the benefits of crop rotation, planting different crops each year to help put nutrients back into the soil. George Washington Carver. At work in his laboratory. 1875, Alexander Graham Bell invented a machine to transmit a human voice over wires, the telephone. The first telephone lines between cities went up in 1877. By 1880, more than 34,000 miles of telephone wire connected thousands of American homes and businesses. Bell had the opening of the long-distance line from New York to Chicago in 1892. Thomas Alva Edison had more than 1,000 patents for his ideas and inventions. He invented the first light bulb and electrical generating system in 1879. He also invented the phonograph, a device made it possible to record sound. Edison also developed the kinescope, a camera-like device that was the first successful form of motion pictures. Thomas Edison's first successful light bulb model 1879. At the end of the 19th century, there was a lot of unrest in Cuba. Cuba was under the rule of Spain and wanted to be free. The US was sympathetic, but did not want any trouble with Spain. Cuba. President William McKinley had served in the Civil War, so he knew the horrors of war. He didn't want America to get involved in another war. He came up with a plan to send a battleship USS Maine to Cuba. McKinley thought the ship's presence would calm the situation. William McKinley, USS Maine 189, USS Maine 1898. The plan worked for several weeks. Then on February 15, 1898, the Maine exploded. 266 men died in the blast. The cause of the explosion was not obvious. Even wounded soldiers on the ship could not explain what caused the blast. Sunken USS Maine in Havana's harbor. U.S. newspapers picked up the story and blamed Spain for the explosion. Spain insisted that the explosion came from inside the ship. Americans read the newspaper stories and demanded that Spain be punished. On April 25, 1898, President McKinley finally caved and America declared war on Spain. Theodore Roosevelt and his Rough Riders. By August, the war was over and the Treaty of Paris 1898 was signed in December. Spain granted Cuba its freedom. The United States gained the Spanish territories of Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. The United States emerged as a world power after the victory over Spain. Signing the Treaty of Paris 1898. U.S. troops raising the American flag in the Philippines. After gaining several new territories in the Spanish-American War, America needed a way to get from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean without having to go around South America. President Theodore Roosevelt believed that the solution was to build a canal in Central America. He believed that this would help America's economic, trading, and military, navy, interests. In 1882, a French company had started to build a canal in Central America. They soon stopped the project after yellow fever and malaria, carried by mosquitoes, killed many of the workers. The U.S. bought a 10-mile stretch of land from Panama, and took over construction of the canal in 1904. Doctors taught the workers how to combat the diseases. Workers drained swamps, covered supplies with tents, and put in new sewers to stop the spread of diseases. President Theodore Roosevelt sitting on a steam shovel at the Panama Canal minus 1906. When the Panama Canal opened in 1914, it was a huge shortcut between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Americans now had access to world trade. The U.S. Navy could defend the country's interests all across the globe. First ship to pass through the Panama Canal minus 1914. A ship passing through the canal. One of the largest human migrations in history happened at the turn of the century. Many people left their home countries to come to the United States. This is called emigration, leaving your homeland to make a long journey to a new country. A person who moves to a new country is an immigrant. One of the largest human migrations in history happened at the turn of the century. Many people left their home countries to come to the United States. This is called emigration, leaving your homeland to make a long journey to a new country. A person who moves to a new country is an immigrant. Slavic immigrant family. In the baggage room of Ellis Island, 1905. Most immigrants came to America in search of a better life. Most were poor and wanted to escape Europe's rigid class system. If you were born poor in Europe, you had little chance of moving into the middle or upper class. They believed that class didn't matter as much in America because if you worked hard, you could find a better life. Immigrants from Spain, 1911. Immigrants were also trying to escape wars and persecution. There were many wars in Europe during this time. Many people were killed, homes were destroyed, young men were forced to serve in armies. People were also harassed because of their religious beliefs. Hungarian immigrants, 1905. Between 1860 and 1900, more than 13 million people emigrated to the U.S. Most of the immigrants were from Western Europe, Germany, Great Britain, and Ireland. Some came from Southern and Eastern Europe, Italy, Greece, Poland, and Russia. Some came from Asia, especially China and Japan. Some came from Mexico and Puerto Rico. Immigrants arriving at Ellis Island, New York City, 1902. Japanese immigrants in California,